Good evening, I'm Farhana Sheikh. Our top stories for tonight. Russia says Trump's weapons pledge pushes Kyiv away from peace. And EU approves new Russia sanctions with lower oil price cap. More coming up on AWANI International. Russia has declared that US President Donald Trump's decision to ramp up weapon shipments to Ukraine is a signal for Kyiv to abandon peace efforts. Now, Moscow also vows it will not tolerate what it calls Washington's blackmail through new sanctions. A foreign ministry spokesperson said actions by the collective West were a clear sign for Ukraine to continue the conflict. The spokesperson added that the threat of further sanctions was routine and that ultimatums and threats are unacceptable. Moscow said they would continue to take steps to ensure its security and protect its interests. Trump had hardened his stance on the Ukraine war on Monday, setting a 50-day deadline for Russia to agree to a ceasefire or face 100% tariffs and secondary sanctions on countries buying Russian oil. The US has also pledged to send more missiles and advanced weapons to Kyiv. In other news, the European Union has agreed on an 18th sanctions package against Russia due to its war in Ukraine. The new raft of measures aim to deal further blows to Moscow's oil and energy industry. The latest sanctions package will lower the G7's price cap for crude oil to $47.6 per barrel. It also includes a ban on transactions related to Russia's Nord Stream gas pipelines and targets the financial sector. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas described it as one of the strongest sanctions packages against Russia to date. She said the EU would continue to raise costs in a bid to stop Moscow's aggression. We have more after this break. Don't go anywhere.
Berita hebat untuk pelanggan Astro Movies dan Epic Pack. Prime Video kini termasuk dalam langganan anda.
Who's the action hero now?
Anda boleh stream 24 jam sehari. Pelbagai filem kesukaan anda.
Amazing.
Janab. Hindustan.
Amazon Originals.
It's big.
Are you ready? Serta K-Favorites terkini. Semua ni dan banyak lagi.
Kalian pilih video siapa yang akan tayang.
Pelanggan Astro Movies dan Epic Pack. Stream Prime Video sekarang dengan Astro. Anda juga boleh langgan Prime Video melalui aplikasi My Astro.
Welcome back. China says it wants to bring commercial ties with the US back to a healthy state. Commerce Minister Wang Wentao adds that recent talks in Europe show there is no need for a continued tariff war. He added that Beijing would continue to strengthen dialogue and communication with Washington to put economic and trade relations back on track. Wang reiterated that while China is not afraid of a trade war, it does not want one to happen. China faces an August 12th deadline to reach a tariff agreement with the US, after both sides struck a deal last month to end weeks of escalating tariffs. Failure to meet that deadline could see global supply chains hit with duties exceeding 100%. Meanwhile, according to customs data, China's rare earth exports rose 32% month-on-month in June, a sign that agreements made last month in London to free up metal flows may be starting to pay off. Meanwhile, China says it is ready to take steps to avoid an economic slowdown in the second half of the year. Commerce Minister Wang Wentao assures the economy is improving with great potential in the domestic consumption market. When asked about China's dependence on exports, Wong said the government is preparing policies to boost consumption momentum. He added that China is also promoting new forms of consumption, citing Beijing-based toy maker Pop Mart, whose Labubu dolls have become sought-after collector items. Growth in China hit 5.2% in the second quarter, according to official data on Tuesday. However, retail sales rose far less than expected and were weaker than May, suggesting efforts to revive consumption have yet to gain traction. Prime Minister Dato' Sri Anwar Ibrahim says it is too early for the government to decide on whether to accept Nick Adams as the next US ambassador to Malaysia. He says Putrajaya is following proper protocol in considering foreign envoy appointments.
Anwar added that the decision would also consider strong bilateral ties between Malaysia and the United States. US President Donald Trump has nominated Adams for the post, but he must first be confirmed by the US Senate. While no vote date has been set, Adams' appointment is expected to be approved, as the Republican-held Senate has backed all Trump nominees since January. His nomination has sparked controversy in Malaysia due to his Islamophobic comments and support for the Zionist regime, drawing strong criticism from Malaysian leaders and civil society. Under diplomatic protocol, an ambassador cannot be appointed without the host country's prior consent.
This is the latest update in Syria. Heavy clashes have resumed between Druze fighters and Bedouin tribes in Syria's southern province of Suwaida. A Syrian Interior Ministry spokesperson, however, has denied reports that forces were preparing to redeploy to the province. A ceasefire announced on Wednesday had paused days of deadly clashes between both sides. Syrian troops withdrew from Suwaida after the truce was announced, but clashes sparked up again late Thursday. Israel earlier warned that it will continue fighting to protect the Druze, demanding complete withdrawal of government forces in the south. Syria's interim president, Ahmed al-Shara, yesterday accused Israel of trying to divide the country and vowed to defend the Druze community. Now, the US, meanwhile, says it did not support Israel's recent strikes on Syria, adding that it is engaging both countries to manage the crisis and reach a long-term solution. 12 Arab nations, including Saudi Arabia, Jordan and Egypt, had also issued a joint statement backing Syria's sovereignty and rejecting foreign interference. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva says Brazil remains open to dialogue with the US, but rejects what he called unacceptable blackmail and threats to Brazilian institutions. He is responding to US President Donald Trump's threat to impose a 50% tariffs on Brazil, set to take effect on August 1st.
Lula earlier said that he would not take orders from a gringo, a common term in Brazil for foreigners. Lula also said Trump was elected as the leader of the United States and not to be the emperor of the world. He said Brazil will continue plans to regulate and tax US tech firms, accusing them of spreading violence and fake news under the guise of free speech. Last week, Trump attributed the additional 50% tariffs to Brazil's treatment of former President Jair Bolsonaro and alleged unfair trade practices against US companies. He also sent a letter to Bolsonaro, his close ally, expressing concerns over free speech in Brazil, saying he will be watching closely. Bolsonaro is currently on trial for allegedly plotting a coup to block Lula's inauguration in 2023.
US President Donald Trump has ordered the Justice Department to present additional documents related to sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Attorney General Pam Bondi has been asked to produce any grand jury testimony subject to court approval.
Shortly after Trump's statement, Bondi announced that the Justice Department was ready to move the court on July 18th to unseal the grand jury transcripts. While campaigning last year, Trump had promised to release files relating to the disgraced financier. But last week, Bondi said the Justice Department did not believe Epstein had a so-called client list that could implicate high-profile associates. She also maintained that he took his own life despite persistent conspiracy theories. Trump's move comes amid growing demands for more transparency in the Epstein case, causing a rare fracture within his base of support. Epstein had died in a New York prison cell in 2019 while awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges. His death came over a decade after his conviction for soliciting prostitution from a minor, which led to his registration as a sex offender.
The Republican-led House has narrowly passed U.S. President Donald Trump's $9 billion funding cut to public media and foreign aid. The final tally was 216 to 213, with GOP representatives Mike Turner and Brian Fitzpatrick the only Republicans to vote against the package. The package now heads to the White House to be signed into law. The Senate revised the package earlier this week, removing $400 million in proposed cuts to the global PEPFAR HIV/AIDS program. House Republicans faced added pressure to approve the Senate version, as the Trump administration would have been required to spend the funds if Congress did not approve the cuts by Friday. The $9 billion cut represents about 1/10 of 1% of the $6.8 trillion federal budget. Canada's International Trade Minister Maninder Sidhu says there is mutual interest to advance trade talks with South America's Mercosur bloc as Ottawa seeks to diversify beyond the U.S. This comes as Prime Minister Mark Carney negotiates with U.S. President Donald Trump to finalize a trade deal by August 1st that could lower tariffs on Canadian goods.
Canada is working to reduce its heavy reliance on the US, which is its largest trading partner with over $727 billion in trade last year, by pursuing free trade agreements worldwide. Back in April, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva had expressed interest in advancing trade talks with Canada. Mercosur, which includes Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay and Uruguay, has previously held negotiation rounds with Canada. Currently, Canada has 15 free trade deals covering 51 countries and access to 1.5 billion consumers. Sidhu said Ottawa will pursue more agreements in the coming months but did not specify targets. In his first 2 months in office, Sidhu signed a free trade deal with Ecuador and an investment promotion pact with the UAE. Discussions are ongoing with ASEAN countries and Indo-Pacific nations, including Indonesia and the Philippines.
Taiwan does not seek conflict with China and will not provoke one, but Beijing's aggressive military posture is counterproductive, says Vice President Xiaobi Kim on Friday. Her remarks follows an annual military drill preparing for a possible Chinese missile strike.
Xiao said Chinese pressure has intensified in recent years, but stressed that Taiwan's people are peace-loving. China's foreign ministry responded by saying Taiwan and the mainland belong to one China, regardless of what Taiwan says. On Thursday, sirens wailed across Taipei as residents took part in mandatory evacuation drills during an air raid exercise. This year's military drill was Taiwan's biggest ever, lasting 10 days, twice as long as last year, and mobilizing 22,000 reservists, up from 14,500. Though Beijing has never ruled the island, Taiwan has long prepared for a Chinese attack as China regularly threatens to use force to take it.
Indonesia is still finalizing a trade deal with the US, seeking exemptions for palm oil, nickel, cocoa and rubber exports, according to an official. According to Indonesia's economic industry senior official, Susi Wijono Megarso, Washington has agreed to cut tariffs on Indonesian goods from 32% to 19%, which will apply on top of existing sectoral tariffs.
In return, Indonesia will exempt U.S. tech products from local content rules, while all other U.S. goods imported into Indonesia will face zero tariffs, except for alcoholic drinks and pork. Some U.S. products will also be exempt from import quotas. Indonesia is the world's largest palm oil producer and the top supplier to the US, accounting for 85% of the country's palm oil imports in 2024. Susi Wijono also added that Indonesia plans to purchase jets for Garuda Indonesia from Boeing. And its state energy firm Pertamina will import energy from the US pending business reviews.
That wraps up AWANI International. Stay tuned for reports on the rivalry strategies and the shifts behind the power affairs driving the new global order. Visit international.astroawani.com for more and be sure to follow our social media accounts at Power Affairs. I am Farhana Sheikh. Thank you for watching and good night.